Well, thank you so much for agreeing to this one-to-one interview.
Oh, you're welcome.
It looks amazing. I mean, I had a good look at Premonition's website, all the solutions and the tools you offer. It's absolutely incredible, and it's really perfect for the commission that we're doing, because you're one of the tech firms that actually develops some software that's being used by law enforcement agencies, if I'm not mistaken. It's called the Vigil surveillance. Is that the one?
Yeah, Vigil is kind of like it monitors the court system. So you can say, I want a certain type. Let me know when a certain individual has a case, or it changes, or companies. There's quite a few different kind of things that it can do, but it basically watches. In America, you have this very strange situation where you have literally thousands and thousands of different courts, and they're not connected. So if someone does something naughty down in Miami, they don't know about it in Orlando.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. And let's say the FBI wanted to know about a particular person, and they wanted to go and find out about it in the courts. You literally have to go to every courthouse to find it. It's just nuts.
That's unbelievable. Yeah.
So with our system, we visit all these online courts every hour, get all the latest cases and put them in one place. So you can run a query that says, let me know all the cases Toby's been in, or you could also say, let me know if something comes up with Toby, or let me know if one of his cases moves, or something like that. And the data then comes to you. It's much more proactive.
Wow, incredible. That's really interesting. Brilliant. Okay, so I sent you some of the questions beforehand.
Yes.
I'm going to go through them, but if you think they're not really applicable to what you're doing, then it's completely fine. We'll just move on to the next.
Okay. Sure. Most of these I had reasonable answers for. A couple were repetitive, but...
Okay, brilliant. I mean, maybe we can start with a discussion on whether you know of any algorithms that are currently in use in the justice system in England and Wales, or if there are any that are currently being developed?
Well, I think some of this is like getting our terminology right. I have this saying, it's not my saying at all, it's from Confucius. It says, the beginning of all wisdom is to call things by their rightful name.
Amazing.
And, when we're saying algorithms, well, we use algorithms, and we have done for centuries. Things like sentencing guidelines, that's an algorithm. And, I think people are talking about like an algorithm which may be good or it might be evil coming into the justice system. That doesn't really I don't think that's really what we're talking about. We're actually talking about programs and data, and a program like Premonition it's not one algorithm, it's thousands of algorithms. And things like machine learning, and here I'm talking about proper machine learning, not AI, isn't really an algorithm per se. It's pattern matching. So you feed it a bunch of one type of data, and you feed it a bunch of another, and you say, these are good people, these are bad people, or whatever, and it'll figure it out based on all kinds of weird criteria that are not necessarily criteria you tell it, but it's not an algorithm, it's matching a pattern. So then you can then say, look, here's someone you've never seen before, tell me if they're a good person or a bad person.
Useful, absolutely. So, I mean, this is an issue that we encountered as well, and it's exactly what you said. The use of algorithm isn't actually new. The police, they've been using algorithms, forever. We were giving the example of the license plate devices that the police use to detect license plates and registry. That's an algorithm basically, but it's not really problematic. So I guess some of the problematic issues might be more linked to the data, or the amount of data that algorithms maybe can process, where that data comes from, how it's pruned. Is that fair?
It wouldn't be fair as it applies to us.
Great.
There's been kind of talk that I've heard about other people giving evidence and things like that, where they talk about kind of data being biased. Data in and of itself is not biased. It's just data. Now, I mean, you can analyze it and put all kinds of spin on it if you want to, and that brings bias in, but raw data itself has no bias. And the vast majority of the data that we deal with is from the public record. So it's accessible to everybody. We just happen to have much more of it than everybody else because we made it our mission to get all we could lay our hands on. And we automated that. And it's generally accepted that anyone can use a public record for any purposes and it belongs to everybody, and it's also accepted under the law that you may treat the public record as fact and you have the absolute right to rely on it. So that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily apply to us. If we were crunching patient data or something like that, those could be some valid concerns. But for what we're doing for law purposes, it's all public record, really.
Correct. In your opinion, what are some of the benefits that can be derived from the use of algorithms in the justice system? And I guess, machine learning and this way of processing huge amounts of data.
Well, I think from a justice system, there's a number of benefits. The main one is transparency. People don't like lawyers and the legal system because it's seen to be a very opaque thing where you often have results that are really quite random. And with algorithms, you don't have that because there's a kind of fairness to that. And computers work much faster than humans. So there's a lot of speed benefits there. Justice is sure, justice is swift. People talk about that justice should be swift and things should be fair and happen quickly, they talk about it, but that doesn't happen. So there's a lot of things like that, and we all know the studies like the Israeli parole board, where if you go to them just before lunchtime, you are not getting out, whereas if you go after lunchtime, you probably will. So really, it is when the judge when the board last ate, is you determine whether you get out or not, and that cannot possibly be fair. But it is, and we found in Premonition that 30.7% of the average case is the relationship with the judge and the lawyers. Now, is that also fair? No, it's not fair, but it's a fact. So, our clients hire us to kind of game the legal system by who can I put before this judge that is good friends with them. Is that fair? Probably not. And we say it's a very, very unfair advantage in litigation, but I think the end result of this, when everybody is doing that, is that you get a more transparent system, and as I say, every great change in law will come from transparency. Peter Diamandis says most evil is done in the dark, and people do bad things for the most part because they believe they can get away with it. And if all of a sudden, if I do something bad, everyone's going to know about it, I'm unlikely to be doing something bad because of the observer effect.
Mm-hmm.
I think that algorithms can add kind of like guardrails to the justice system, where they can identify outcomes that are outliers in one way or another. So most of our clients are from the insurance industry, and insurers actually have no problem with paying out claims. It's a cost of business for them. They anticipate that in all their underwriting models. They have problems with paying out excessive claims, where people are being paid a lot of money for something they really shouldn't be. It's one of my favorite frivolous cases from America is where there's a lady who witnessed a traffic accident and sued for it, and you're not supposed to be able to do that. Hill and Young in the UK said that they expect a reasonable degree of fortitude from people, but she witnessed a traffic accident and she sued. She sued for the loss of her psychic powers.
That's convenient, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you would have thought she would have seen it coming. So she sues for the loss of her psychic powers, and she won. And a jury awarded her $500,000.
Wow.
And, it's insurers who have to pay out for things like that. So, in the one hand, you want to cut off the kind of risk tail of these excessive awards, and then on the other hand, there are some people that, something bad has happened to them and they deserve to be made whole, and they go to court seeking a remedy for that, and they don't get one. And that's wrong, but for the individuals, it's also wrong for our society as a whole, because we should be able to rely on the justice system to remedy wrongs. And when that doesn't happen, that's also wrong. So by factoring in a kind of digital oversight and chopping off these risk tails of bad outcomes on both sides, you're left with good outcomes, which for the most part, the justice system eventually does work, and most outcomes are reasonable, because there's a lot of people that see that that's the case, but there's just some that are not, and algorithms can help clip those risk tails off.
Are there any dangers linked to the use of algorithm in the justice system?
I would say that the dangers are in not using it enough. It's saying you make bad decisions when you don't have enough data. More data is always tends to be better. Most of the dangers that I believe other people have been talking about are about basically misgrouping, and that's not a technical problem, that's a human problem. The humans screwed up and the humans made mistakes. Our developers use the word human as a derogatory term. Whatever the problem is, the humans did that. And I think also there's issues, that is again not a technical issues, that politicians dictate policy, and policy is sometimes wrong. Like in the States, every politician fights themselves to be tougher on crime than the next. So you wind up with a situation where the United States is the biggest jailer per capita on Earth. More than South Africa was, more than China, more than Russia. And by that state, it's a very oppressive regime, as it were. And it's a shame because it costs a lot of money and it's very burdensome on the country and doesn't actually really do much to stop crime. I mean, gun crime, etc., is way off the charts over here. And locking up a bunch of people doesn't really fix it. So I say, rather than being tough on crime, people should be seen to be being right on crime. That the kind of sentencing matches the crime and the likelihood to reoffend and so on and so forth.
Right. Okay, great. I might move on a little bit to the data. So you were saying that all of your data that you use is from public sources, accessible by anyone.
Yeah.
Can you tell me some of the public sources that you use to get this data?
Sure. And basically, our main source of data is we scrape court websites.
Okay.
And this is a fairly industry standard thing. Most of the big companies do that. We just happen to do it better and faster, and we've found ways of doing it at scale. So we visit thousands of court websites every single hour, scrape all the data down, normalize it, put it in one place. That's where the vast majority of our data comes from.
Right. Right. If we move to the legal side, in your view, who is liable if a decision made by an algorithm proves to have negative or harmful consequences?
Sorry, you say it again?
If we move on to the sort of the legal side,
Okay.
the liability question.
Right.
So if you're using an algorithm to help you come to a decision which ends up having negative or harmful consequences, who do you think should be liable in those instances?
Well, I would say the kind of designer of the algorithms is ultimately the kind of liable party, because and I guess there is an argument for the people that then use that data and put it forward. But I would say, ultimately it's like that. If you get in a car and you press the brakes and the software error doesn't apply the brakes, it's not your fault as a driver, it's the car manufacturer's fault. So I would say that. But I'd also stress that algorithms are not the be-all and end-all. They're a tool for kind of a crutch for human decision-making.
Right.
And, we all have things in our lives. I used the system to find an attorney for myself at one point, and there was one guy, he came out number one, and he asked me how I found him, and I told him, I said, congratulations, you are the best lawyer in Orlando for this case type, and have a 88% win rate, I think it was. And he starts arguing with me. It's not 88, it's 100. And no. You had a judgment here and a judgment here, and this was transfer, and no, it's not. Well, I mean, it might be, but it's in the 90s, not 88. And I decided not to go with him because I didn't like him.
Wow, yeah.
And I didn't want to have to deal with him for 3 years. The computer's in love with him, but I went with number 3 and worked out quite well. So it's one thing that we bring into our judgment.
Very interesting. So you're based in? Are you based in Florida? Am I right?
Yeah. I'm in Orlando. We have offices in Miami and Palm Beach and places as well.
Correct. Nice. Does Premonition do any work in the UK, or is it only in the US?
No, we have UK. We actually have the biggest UK law database, and on our site premonition.ai, every year we do the UK Courts Report, where we list the best law firms and barristers for each court.
Great. Has GDPR changed anything in the way that Premonition works?
It changed some of our internal marketing stuff as to how we market to UK residents, but other than that, not really, because the vast majority of what we do is public record.
Okay.
Which is great, because it means we just don't have to think about quite a number of things.
Right. In the US, they're quite advanced in their use of algorithm to help with decision making, right? So there's certain states where judges use them, for example, for sentencing decisions or these kind of issues. Are there any areas of justice where you think the use of algorithm is not appropriate?
That's a tough one for me to say, because personally, I think algorithms are much better than human decision making, and there have been over 200 studies that show that most of the time algorithms will beat human decision making. I guess the biggest example that is the least free from algorithms is family court.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say family law, I say law in quotation marks, because there's practically no family law in comparison. It's very subjective. The judges basically make it up as they go along. I mean, I'm not saying that. For the most part, I think judges are probably quite decent people, but they're people and they make mistakes, and they make judgments based on what is put in front of them by lawyers, and lawyers are not always truthful. And as a result, family law has a reputation of being the Wild West of the legal profession, and divorces are horrible. I started Premonition because I was just so pissed off with the outcome of my divorce. For one example, I have a friend who's had a divorce that's gone on now. Went on for 21 years.
What?
Yes.
That's unbelievable. That's in the US, right?
In the US, they actually give his divorce out in law school locally, because it's one of the 3 worst outcomes for a man in Central Florida. So occasionally he'll get a call from law students asking him about it. Now, you contrast this with, I once had a time where I had 3 marriage offers in 30 days, and one of them was a Swedish girl and a lawyer, and sorry, I do not want to get married again because of what has kind of happened to me. And she says in Sweden, a divorce cannot go on for longer than 6 months. That is the law. And there are certain kind of preset criteria for children, family, what happens with the house, the finances, etc., etc. Now, you can hire a lawyer, but your outcome will not change. Mm-hmm. So therefore, most people don't hire a lawyer, and the Swedish process is far less contentious than the American process.
How can you imagine?
That's a great system. Now, I don't see that coming to America anytime soon because there's no money in it for the lawyers. But that's a much better system than what we have here. And I think...
I see. So I guess what you're saying is trying to remove the sort of random element of it, right? Which is basically lawyers arguing and then the judge kind of making it up, and algorithm bring certainty into the process. Is that part of the argument?
It brings more certainty into...
And structure?
It brings structure and certainty. I mean, you could say it also brings a benchmark. So we have one of our systems is called JusText. So you can upload a document, it pulls out the statutes and precedents that are in it, and plots kind of win rates for these things. So then you can filter it down and you can say, okay, based on this type of keyword, like say maritime law, then for this particular pleading, who's likely to win, plaintiff or defendant? And it'll give you a percentage, and it'll say, hey, you want to take out these particular precedents, and you might want to put in these other ones to kind of make it better. I mean, there's a few other things you can do with that. You can then filter it by judge. So, say for every precedent, there is an equal and opposite precedent. And a lot of precedents are somewhat nonsensical and go against each other. So in the UK, famously, you have Crown versus Brown and Crown versus Wilson. And these are cases with almost identical sets of facts, but completely different outcomes. I personally believe in small government and individuals' freedom of choice. I'm a Wilson guy. If you come to me with a Brown-based argument, I'm going to find a way to differentiate you and overrule you. I believe that Brown was wrongly decided, but both Brown and Wilson are good law. You can quote them any way you want, and you really want to know whether the judge is Brown or Wilson before you bring an argument to them based on it. So with this, it'll tell you, it'll say, every time people have been before Toby with a Brown-based argument, they have lost. So I know, okay, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to bring a different argument. But what you can also do with this software is when the judge has written up their ruling, you can put it through that, and it will tell you how aligned that reasoning is with their peers.
Wow, that's amazing.
So you think about the various things you could do with that. Do you really need an appeal system? So afterwards, one side's lost and they come out, well, we're going to appeal this. Really? That ruling had a 97% JusText rating, right? So, let me know how that goes, counsellor. And then in America, there's some lawyers and even law firms that are notorious for putting out a new motion every week, sometimes a couple a week. And these are often just complete nonsense, and sometimes they just do it continually, and these things are never heard. It's just a way to keep the pressure on. And also, coincidentally, the lawyers make money every time they're writing. So it's good for them too. But imagine if they're getting a call from the clerk of court. Hey, I saw you just filed this motion here. It has a 17% JusText rating. Right? So you are likely to lose it. It's near certain that you will. We're happy to hear it for you, but anything that has a JusText rating below 40%, there's $5,000 kind of fine for it. Are you sure you'd like us to hear it? Now, a lot of the lawyers then are probably going to say, no, I'll withdraw it. But if it's really important, then you'll roll the dice. But something like that removes these disincentives of people filing kind of disingenuous motions that don't really serve the interests of justice, and make sure that everything is well aligned. So there's a lot of uses for that. Take out court bloat, you can make sure that these rulings are better. And it's good for the judges too, because it acts kind of like grammar check on what they're doing. So you don't. I remember someone saying to me, my biggest fear as a judge is to be overruled. And that is really unlikely to happen if you put it into a system and say, you might want to look at these two precedents that you're citing here because they don't really fit with the rest of them.
Right. Brilliant, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think concepts such as transparency and explainability, are they relevant within this discussion about algorithm and machine learning and all of this?
They are relevant. Well, transparency is relevant for everything, and it's a massive driver. Every great change in law will come from transparency. You're not going to get things getting better without it, because you need to see what's going on. Now, being able to kind of show why a decision was made, you can see that from algorithms, and that's kind of useful. Now, with machine learning, traditionally, it's a kind of pattern matching thing, and it's been kind of a black box, and you can't necessarily see what's gone into it and why it's made a particular decision. I remember an interesting one about predicting cancer, and the computer was doing it based on where the name of the clinic, because there was a certain clinic where people that had more cancer tended to go to. So it got the right result via the wrong route. But there's been a lot of movement recently to be able to kind of show the weightings of this. And really that's all it is. It's just I assign a certain weight to certain things, and therefore this is the result at the end of the day. And that's not a terribly difficult thing to do. If it's a misnomer for people to think that cannot be done in machine learning, because it can, and it's quite easy.
Is there a difference then between transparency and explainability?
Transparency and explainability. Perhaps you can reword that question.
Okay. Maybe a good example is to put it like this. So you're a commercial company, you develop software that you then license for other people to use?
Yes.
Is that more or less how it works?
Yeah, some of it's that, and some of it's we provide services. Sometimes people come to us and they say, actually, we have our own technology which we like, but we would like to buy data from you because you have more than everybody else.
Right.
So there's a few kind of bits and pieces like that. But for the most part, I'd say 99% plus of what we do is just very simple algorithms. It's not machine learning. We do have some machine learning stuff, but you can see on our website it has methodology and it very clearly says how we pick winners and losers. It's not rocket science, and finding who's the best in the court is just really simple. We just filter by case type and judge and just add up the number of times someone won and lost, and hey presto, that's the win rate. The computer does it and does a nice scatter chart, so you can easily see these guys in the top right hand corner. That's who I want to hire. And it's not terribly complicated, it's just very repetitive. There's some UK courts, pretty much anything other than appeals, I'd say you could probably do manually if you really wanted to.
Great. So I guess that actually clears things up to an extent. So transparency would be explaining how your algorithms basically work on your website, to be like what you've just explained to me, and you make it clear. And I guess that is being transparent as to here are the public records that we mine, here is how the algorithm sort of crunches all of this data, here is the weight that you accords to it, and here is the result that you get. I guess when you put this on your website, that is transparency. When you provide a service for a firm and they ask you, well, how did you come up with, how did the algorithm come up with that result? It's about you saying, well, here is the processes that the algorithm makes in order to come to that decision. So I guess the difference between the two is slight, and it might be more appropriate in instances where the algorithm is a little bit more complex and the calculations that it makes are difficult to explain to a layperson, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that.
So transparency is, in a way, is just the instruction manual of how you build the algorithm or how the algorithm is built. Explainability is translating that into something that's understandable for your normal user of the justice system. You might not have high level of IT literacy.
Exactly. Well, we had this in the UK when we first started. I remember some barrister stood up at a meeting and was like, "You can't possibly have done what you say that you've done. It's too many cases." Well, in the UK, there's just under 4,000 cases a year in the high courts that make it to trial, and in America, we deal with 41,000 cases every day. So,
wow.
Data-wise, it's a rounding error. And then someone else stood up and said, "Well, you can't possibly, a computer can't possibly read a decision and figure out who won and who lost." I said, "Well, computer reads it exactly the same way you and I read it." I said, "Well, how do you mean?" I said, "Well, we skip to the last page and we look at the last sentence, and it says something like, 'Therefore dismiss the appeal,' and that meant that the respondent won, right? And there's only a certain number of words that people use in the justice system to express these kind of decisions. So we say, when you see this string of words, this is the winner, and this string, this is the winner, and it's not very many of those, and you can cover nearly every outcome. And a system can read 50,000 documents in under a second, so we can get through quite a bit.
That is perfect. That's great. Thank you. It's very useful. Are there any regulation that would discourage you from entering the public justice system. So let's say, for example, that the government comes out saying, a regulator has to, let's say, approve algorithm for their use in the justice sector. Would this be problematic for Premonition, for example?
At the moment, it's not something that we have to necessarily do. It's hard to regulate what you don't understand.
That's very true.
And usually when Premonition is dealing with someone else, we have to explain it to them. Because we know more about this than everybody else. And I would imagine, like your inquiry right now, when people are looking to do something like this, usually they come and talk to us. And quite often they're taking our advice on whatever it is because we know this and other people don't. As we have the data and other people don't. I guess if that came to pass, it would likely come to pass in kind of conjunction with consulting with us. But at the moment, data is not really a very regulated field. We don't have a regulator that we have to go to at all. Mm-hmm. And most of the data is a public record and not allowed to put restrictions on it. The UK is a signature to the Montreal Convention, which basically says public record belongs to the public, you're not allowed to charge for it, you're not allowed to put extra conditions on it, and anyone could theoretically do what we could do. You could go through every case online and make a little spreadsheet and figure things out. We just happen to do it at a million cases a day sometimes.
Right, so it's not something that you're worried about, regulation. It's not something that you think this could crop up in the future, and it might be problematic.
I don't think it's likely on the public record legal side. There are areas that we're starting to get into in the States, like kind of lending and stuff like that, where we're having people doing background checks. Some of that, there is some regulatory things which we're actually kind of starting to roll out as we're getting into those areas. But this area right here that we're talking about, there's no regulator, and I don't really see one. I don't really see one in the future, just because it's very hard to. You can't regulate what people do with public data. It belongs to the public.
Great. That's very useful. Great. So if you think about the current state of algorithm in the justice system now, and you try and project yourself maybe to 5 years or 3 years down the line, what are some of the kind of changes that you foresee?
Nothing really happens in 5 years in the justice system and legal tech. It's very, very slow. And I go and we went to see the minister and say, I really think that we need to bring the justice system kicking and screaming into 1998. Because, this is a thing that should have been done 30 years ago and just happened. So that's kind of problematic. Things don't move fast, but eventually we're talking with a guy who's on the Judicial Oversight panel for America, and we're talking with him about what we term judicial dashboards. So we can basically look across the country as a whole. In America, you have this crazy situation where you can take one case into one court in one jurisdiction, it'll go one way, and in another it'll go the other. So venue is huge. For example, Johnson & Johnson, they have 9,000 cases right now about talcum powder. The cases that get heard in New Jersey, they win. And the cases that get heard in St. Louis, Missouri, they lose. Because certain areas, like Cook County, Illinois, had a reputation of being a very plaintiff-friendly jurisdiction. In America, there are 208 federal courts that you can file a patent in. But amazingly, something like 44% of them are filed in the Eastern District of Texas.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, and there's one particular judge that he has something like 17% of the nation's patent cases. And if you can get before that judge, you're probably going to win on the plaintiff side. You go somewhere else, no.
Fascinating.
That shouldn't happen. That is wrong. And but it can be quite difficult to see, whereas we can plot it immediately, and we can do maps for different colours and so on and so forth, and then we can zoom in and we can see judges and how they compare. And people talk about tough judge, easy judge, and a lot of this courtroom chit chat is absolutely totally wrong. We do a lot of our analysis with a judge called Judge Ike, and we were told in courtroom chit chat that he was very biased in favour of a particular group, and when we looked into it, it was total nonsense. Not a biased judge at all. It was quite a decent one, and it just became fascinating to us. So we always kind of started looking at it. But when you can kind of measure this stuff, and you say, here's a particular judge, and he has one of the highest overturn rates on the circuit. I was talking with a judge end of last year, and he said, if there's two places where I get appealed to. There's one that always affirms me, and the other is 50-50. And that's crazy as well. You shouldn't be able to go from two of these different places and get these different results. So I see this kind of transparency as you're going to get more uniform decisions when people know that they're being watched, and I can't always give Joe the ruling because he's my friend, which happens whether consciously or subconsciously, because there will be dashboards and judges will see exactly how they're doing and how their stats compare to their peers, and it will start to make things more uniform. And with some of our systems like JusText, where you can actually then look at a ruling afterwards and say, this is good law or this is not, and put numbers to it, that also takes out those kind of outliers of a justice system. And for the most part, justice system is decent, but it's these outliers that get the attention, and they're the things that people dislike and get angry about. And justice is surer when justice can be measured.
It's very interesting. It's absolutely fascinating. One last question, which is a bit hypothetical. Could you foresee, for example, the CPS in England, the Crime Prosecution Service, coming to you and saying, we want to buy your software with regards to which judges tend to favour the prosecution over the defence, and then using it?
Eventually, I think they probably would. I mean, we've had those kind of discussions with similar groups in the States.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have. We had an interesting one of one of the armed services,
right,
where they were very concerned about bias, that African American servicemen were possibly being sentenced more harshly than others. And they had a lot of groups, a lot of senators and congressmen were just peppering these guys with information requests, and they had to do it all manually.
Right.
So it's one of the things that we can do. We have we call it the Names API. It's kind of a boring name, but it can look at a name and tell you whether it's the name of a corporation or of a person. And then it can say whether that person is likely male or female, and then it can tell you their likely racial breakdown. Now, at an individual level, this thing can be wildly wrong. So Anthony Miller, who works with us, he's an African American guy. The system believes he is 85% Caucasian. Miller is a very Caucasian name. But at scale, it is bang on because it's census data, basically, is where we took this from. So we can do things at scale to say, how do, we can do that kind of analysis. We actually did a breakdown of the gender and diversity of the 350 largest law firms in America. We've done this study, Women in Law.
Oh, great. Oh, amazing. Oh, that's where you met Christina, no?
I think Christina is a fan of Women in Law, yes.
She's 7 years.
It's on our website for free, so it's premonition.ai, and we found all kinds of interesting things. It's like female lawyers are less likely to take a losing case to trial. They win 14% more in front of a female judge. Basically, they are significantly better than male lawyers on practically every stat that you can do, and also they're paid a lot less. So for me, as someone who hires lawyers, this is really interesting because this is like an arbitrage opportunity. So if I had no other stats, I would just go and hire as many women lawyers as I can, and because they're better and they charge less. And I think that eventually, with stuff like this, I'd say if you hire by merit, diversity comes standard, and we don't need to focus on doing quotas and things like that. And if you're hiring by merit, you're actually going to get more women than men, and to me, that's fair because that's the market. And I shouldn't be hired or paid more because I happen to be male. If I'm a good lawyer, that's okay. But it's stuff like this that transparency and analysis and algorithms can actually make things much, much better. And you don't have racism, sexism, and all these other kind of discriminatory things. I don't like racism because it's inefficient. And computers don't see this stuff and they don't really care. So that's one of the kind of things benefits you can get from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't make a difference to you if your client is private or public, really?
Not really. I mean, I could see a future. Initially we had some people say, well, what if two people wanted to use our system? Well, what if two people want to look up the same case on LexisNexis? It's data, and we don't necessarily know who's using our system at any one time. So we don't necessarily care who our client is. Most of our clients are insurance companies because they get sued the most. But we also have an offshore shoot called lawyersbywinrate.com, which is a consumer offering that we're starting to build. Because someone came to us and they said, it's not fair that big companies get this edge and someone on the street can't. And we can really argue with them, it isn't fair. So they wanted to be able to do that where someone could come in and get a free referral for their case type and judge, and it doesn't really cost them anything at all to do that. So we said, okay, and we let them do that for the consumer market. I think eventually everyone is going to use this for every case, and it'll become something we don't even think about. It's a very, very unfair advantage moment because not everyone's using it, but eventually everyone will use it, or everyone will have to use it. It's kind of like the nuclear weapons thing. If your neighbour has it, you have to have it too.
Absolutely. Great. Toby, thank you so much. This has been extremely useful.
Thank you. It's been fun.
It's been really great. I mean, fascinating, the work that you're doing, your firm, your view on the whole thing. It's really been enlightening. So thank you very much for your time. It's very much appreciated.
You're very welcome.